Welcome to this explainer. Okay, picture this. It's the year 637 CE. Ctesiphon, the absolute heart of the mighty Sasanian Empire, has just fallen. And now, one final, desperate defensive line is being drawn in the sand at a place called Jalula. Behind these massive earthworks, Persia is gearing up to halt the relentless advance of the Rashidun Caliphate. But here's the craziest part. To defend this line, an entire army spends weeks literally crawling in the dirt, scattering thousands of tiny iron spikes across their own battlefield. They're building a defense so impenetrable that no cavalry on Earth could charge through it. And yet, within just a single afternoon, that exact same field of iron turns into a literal death trap. But it doesn't kill the enemy, it kills them. Today, we're diving deep into the Battle of Jalula.
Section 1. Persia's last offensive line.
So to really grasp the sheer desperation of this moment, we have to look at what was happening across the collapsing Sasanian Empire. Imagine you're a Sasanian soldier, right then. Your empire's literally crumbling around you, and your commander orders you to spend weeks on your hands and knees scattering thousands of these sharp iron spikes all around your own camp. I mean, why would an army deliberately turn their own front yard into a lethal hazard? What were they so terrified of?
Well, to answer that, let's zoom out to the macro level. The Sasanian Empire, which, remember, had governed half the known world for 7 centuries, had just been dealt some absolutely catastrophic blows. First, there was the crushing defeat at al-Qadisiyyah, and then the unthinkable happened. Their magnificent capital, Ctesiphon, fell. The young emperor, Yazdegerd III, is now fleeing east toward the Zagros Mountains. He desperately needs time to escape up into the Iranian Plateau, and frankly, he's willing to sacrifice an entire army to buy that time.
Section 2. Preparing the Iron Trap.
Okay, let's look at this trap. It relied on these iron spikes, which the historical chronicles call al-Had, basically iron thorns. They're essentially ancient caltrops. Now, the genius and the absolute horror of the al-Had is in its brutal simplicity. No matter how you toss it on the ground, one sharp, wicked prong is always pointing straight up. Scattered by the thousands across open terrain, they're designed to turn a cavalry charge into utter chaos. Horses rear up, they collapse, throwing armored riders right into the dirt. It literally breaks an assault before it even really begins. But why deploy this nightmare weapon at Jalula, specifically? Well, Jalula was a town of immense strategic importance. It sat right on the Great Khorasan Road, acting as this natural bottleneck linking Mesopotamia to the Iranian Plateau. Basically, if you control Jalula, you control the gateway to the mountains. So the Sasanian commander's mission was brutally simple. Block this road. Hold this ground behind massive earthworks, no matter what, to ensure the emperor gets away.
Let's set the pieces on the board. On the Rashidun side, Caliph Umar dispatched a highly experienced veteran, Hashim ibn Utbah, along with the legendary cavalry leader al-Khattab ibn Umar. Now, on the Sasanian side, it's actually kind of interesting. The historical chronicles dispute who was actually in charge. Some early Arabic traditions name Mihran Razi, while others point to Farrukhzad. It's a great reminder for us that these ancient sources are narratives, not exact historical census counts. But look, whoever was in command, he knew exactly how devastating the Muslim cavalry could be.
Section 3. The Grinding Standoff.
So, when the Muslim forces arrived in April 637 expecting a fight, they instead hit an impenetrable fortress, entirely dictated by a tactical nightmare of geography. The Sasanian camp had the Diyala River on the east and heavily broken ground on the west that completely eliminates any chance of a wide cavalry flanking maneuver. To the front, they had dug deep defensive trenches, and in the only open corridor left, they seeded the ground with those thousands of iron thorns. The Sasanian commander wasn't trying to win a battle in the open field, he was building an absolute wall. Now, according to early Islamic sources like al-Tabari, Hashim marched out with about 12,000 troops, staring down a Sasanian army that the chronicles estimate at around 20,000 strong. Of course, modern scholarship treats ancient numbers with a healthy dose of caution because they tend to be inflated for dramatic effect, but what is completely undeniable is that the Rashidun force was facing a heavily entrenched, numerically superior enemy who held literally every single geographical advantage. Because of all that, what followed wasn't some quick cinematic clash. It was a grueling, miserable standoff. Depending on which historical chronicle you read, this stalemate dragged on anywhere from several weeks to as long as 7 months. Day after day, Muslim forces launched probing attacks, just trying to find a tiny seam in the defenses, only to be pushed back by the trenches and those iron spikes. And remember, every single day that passed was a Persian victory. It put more distance between their fleeing emperor and the front lines.
Section 4. The irony of defeat.
But, stalemates can't last forever, and this one was broken by a stroke of pure tactical genius from the Rashidun commanders. Realizing a frontal assault was basically suicide, they engaged the Sasanian forces and then executed a highly disciplined, feigned retreat. The Sasanian commander saw this, thought he had the perfect opportunity to crush the retreating army, and ordered his men out of their entrenchments. They threw temporary bridges over their trenches and poured out into the open. But it was a trap. Once the main Persian body was out, Kakaw's elite cavalry moved incredibly fast, sweeping around to the rear and capturing those bridges.
Suddenly surrounded and cut off from their own fortress, the Sasanian line completely broke. And right here is where the profound, tragic irony of Jalula really unfolds. In absolute panic, fleeing Persian soldiers ran blindly back toward their camp, but with the bridges now held by the enemy, they were forced right into the very fields they had seeded with spikes just weeks earlier. The exact same defenses they built to cripple the Arab cavalry were now ripping through the Persian soldiers. They were slaughtered by the very iron trap they had painstakingly built with their own hands. Just wild to think about.
Section 5. Archaeology and historical sources.
So, how do we separate these dramatic legends from historical reality? Well, when we look at early Islamic traditions from historians like al-Tabari and al-Blazuri, they report tens of thousands of casualties at Jalula, along with these vast amounts of captured treasure. Modern scholars, though, try to remain really objective, and they treat those exact figures with caution, since inflating casualty counts was pretty standard in ancient texts. But while the exact numbers are definitely debated, the totality of the Sasanian collapse here, that is completely undisputed. And remarkably, this story isn't just confined to dusty old manuscripts anymore. In November 2023, the Iraqi State Board of Antiquities and Heritage made this incredible announcement. Through extensive archaeological surveys, they actually discovered and recorded the physical traces of the ancient city of Jalula. This is a real game changer because it pulls the whole narrative right out of the realm of legend and anchors it into hard physical reality.
Thanks to the modern fieldwork of archaeologists like Ahmed Abdul-Jabbar Khamas, we can literally trace the actual ground-level structures of this ancient trading center today. We can see exactly where it sat on the Great Khorasan Road. It physically grounds our understanding of the geography that dictated this entire brutal conflict all those centuries ago. Pretty amazing stuff.
Section 6. The gateway opens. Okay, with the physical and historical context locked in, we have to look at the monumental consequences of this defeat. The immediate impact was that the road to Hulwan was left wide open. That massive blocking force the emperor had sacrificed so much to build, it ceased to exist in a single afternoon. When news of the disaster finally reached Hulwan, Emperor Yazdegerd III didn't even try to mount a defense. He abandoned the city before the Arab armies even arrived, fleeing deeper into the Iranian Plateau. His grand mountain gateway had completely evaporated.
The macro-level impact here is just staggering. Following this victory, Caliph Umar ordered a temporary consolidation of the newly conquered territories. Muslim forces swept up the region, capturing Tikrit and Mosul shortly after. So you see, Jalula wasn't just a tough battle. It was the definitive moment when the final organized Sasanian defense of Mesopotamia completely shattered. The Muslim conquest of Iraq, basically the entire territory west of the Zagros Mountains, was now complete.
We so often think of military engineering and grand strategy as the very things that save empires. But at Jalula, a trap that was built to buy time ended up slaughtering the very men meant to defend it. So what does this all mean? How did a single, brilliantly engineered iron trap inadvertently accelerate the collapse of an empire that had stood for 7 centuries? It's a stark, almost chilling reminder that in war, the very walls we build to protect ourselves can sometimes become the exact instruments of our own downfall. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep exploring the incredible truths hidden in our past.